coming. We'll just wait a second to let people come. And just as you probably heard, this session is going to be recorded, so for the benefit of those who aren't able to come and for us as well. Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm really excited. My name is Rabbi David Mason. I'm one of the five rabbis, I should say, who are at the helm of EcoSynagogue. And I'm really excited to be able to welcome all of you here from across the Jewish community to our event, Action on Climate Change, taking the community forward. And I'm really excited that we are, of course, doing this with the Board of Deputies and with rabbis from across the denominations of our community. And that's really, really important. And I think it is amazing what's happening across the community. It's amazing what's happening across the denominations of our community. And we at EcoSynagogue very much feel that we are at the vanguard of this work. We very much feel excited and passionate about moving our community forward and building a greater climate consciousness through working with our synagogues and our organizations as well, and building local activists and synagogues that consider how they are and how sustainable and energy efficient they can be. And so that's really, I'm really pleased to say, impacted on the work that's going on across the community. And that's really, really great. And we're really happy also that we've been able to expand only just recently to bring on Rabbi Jeff Berger from the S&P, the Spanish and Portuguese communities. And I'm really, really pleased that we've got Rabbi Berger in as well. And of course, tomorrow is Tu B'Shvat, which we felt was an apt day to think about climate consciousness, the depth of conversations that we can have about protecting our planet, protecting nature, and protecting the community. It offers up some really, really great values. Today, the 15th of Shvat, the Mishnah, that old Jewish text, talks about today, tonight, and tomorrow as the Rosh Hashanah Ilanot, the new year for trees. And in some ways, it's where there is a meeting place between religion and its laws and its customs and its ideas and the world of nature. The idea that we consider a date after which we almost begin a new tax year, tithing year, for the fruit that comes from the tree, where law meets nature. And we often think about tshuva, repentance or reflection even, or return, as a concept related to religion, to a person, to people. But there's also a return to the land itself. And Tu B'Shvat is very much about returning to the land. When we were at COP as EcoSynagogue, and we were really proud that we had a place at COP26 and did some great work there. I remember Rabbi Tanya talking about thinking of a word for nature consciousness. Now, whatever the Hebrew word is that we can discuss, and that's one of the things we love to do at EcoSynagogue, the idea of nature consciousness, being conscious about nature, is also connected to a sense of God consciousness. It's God that created nature. It's God that gifted us this world. It's God that deposited this world and the climate and the planet for us to protect. And therefore, Tu B'Shvat almost gives us a sense of talking about not just a consciousness of God or person or religion, but also a consciousness of nature as well. And I'm really, really proud to work with my colleagues and with Andrea Pass, with Angelina, and all those involved in EcoSynagogue, along with, of course, the Board of Deputies, to bring that consciousness, that continued reflection on protecting God's nature to the wider Jewish community. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg to introduce our speaker and take you into our event today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi David Mason. And one of the huge joys of EcoSynagogue is working across the community with colleagues in all parts of that. And I'm very moved by that sense of nature consciousness and God consciousness and the sense of tshuva to our relationship with the earth and with the land. JPR, the Institute for Jewish Policy Research, recently conducted an important piece of investigation into attitudes to climate across the community. And we felt that a very, very good launching point for tonight was to understand better how that research was conducted and what its results were. And so in a moment, I'm going to welcome Carli Lessof, Senior Research Fellow at JPR, to present her research. And that will be followed by a conversation which will engage different sectors of the community, the denominations, but also the charitable sector and the corporate sector, and in looking at, well, what do we take from this research? How can it increase our activism? What David said, Rabbi David Mason just said, building activists and building climate consciousness. So those will be the next parts of this evening event. People are welcome to put, particularly during the conversation after the presentation, people are welcome to put questions in the chat or comments in the chat. We'll try to take note of them tonight, but certainly all of us will be taking note of them in the future and learning from them. So can I welcome you, Carli Lessof, Senior Research Fellow at JPR. And I know you're going to you're going to share your screen and present some of your research, and we're going to talk about it afterwards. But first of all, can I ask you, what motivated JPR to see this as an important issue into which to conduct this research?
Well, it's just so important. I mean, I read something a couple of days ago which said that the Jewish community should be treating this as importantly as an issue as important as anti-Semitism. I mean, it's very interesting to know how this issue is held in the Jewish community. Is it important, isn't it? And there's never been any research about climate change in the Jewish community in Britain. And we thought it was important to establish a benchmark, just a few questions to understand what people's views are now, so that over time we can track change and we can provide a kind of evidence base for people who care about this issue to understand where we should be addressing attention, what needs to change, and so on.
Thank you. And that's really important to us as we want to change people's attitudes, to understand where the challenges might really lie and how we can go about them. So with those thoughts in mind, can I invite you to present your research, please?
Absolutely. I'll just try and share my screen. If you could just confirm, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
Fantastic. So the piece of work I'm about to present was a collaboration at JPR, and that was co-authored with my colleagues David Graham and John Boyd. And if you want to download the research, it's available on the JPR website, and it's actually in the invitation. And I can only got time to give you a few of the sort of top line findings, but nevertheless, I'll try and give you a flavor of what we found. You may be aware that JPR has a research panel. When the pandemic started, we realized it was incredibly important to be able to understand what was happening in the community. And so we did a survey where we asked about all kinds of things, the impact of COVID-19 on relationships and work and health and Jewish life. And then we repeated in the summer 2021, we went back to people, about 4,000 people, and we asked these questions again. And this time we asked some extra attitude questions about Israel and Gaza, about politics and Brexit, and about climate change. We only had space to ask 4 questions. So I apologize that this is very brief, but basically we asked, do you think the world's climate is changing? Do you think that climate change is caused by natural processes, human activity, or both? How worried are you about climate change? And to what extent do you feel a personal responsibility to try to reduce climate change? And that's what I'm going to talk about today, just those 4 questions. we took the questions from something called the European Social Survey, which is a very established survey. And these questions were asked a long time ago, 2016. So I'm just going to run through each of the questions in turn and give you the top line. So do Jewish people think the world's climate is changing? 92% agreed that it is, 69% that it was definitely changing, and the others said probably changing. And then we've got about 8% who either are very skeptical, they think it's probably or definitely not changing, and about 4% who just don't know or don't want to say. So that's the answer to that question. The second was, do you think that climate change is caused by natural processes, human activity, or both? And we found that 63% of Jewish people said climate change is entirely or mainly caused by human activity, with just 13% saying it's entirely caused by human activity. And then about another quarter say it's a bit of both. And then we've got a remaining 13% or so who either say that they think it's caused by natural causes or natural processes, or who don't know or don't want to say. The third question about how worried you are about climate change, this time 78% said they would express some worry. Now you might say that's good, you might say that's bad. It's hard to decide what's a kind of reasonable level of worry. But if you're somebody who thinks that there is a climate crisis, then you should be aware that only 17% of the Jewish community at the moment say that they are extremely worried, which maybe is an indicator of people who would say it might be a climate crisis. And then the remainder say they're not worried, not at all worried, or they're not sure. So the last question is I think the most interesting one, and it's to what extent do you feel a personal responsibility to try to reduce climate change? And here people were given a choice from 0, which means that they don't feel at all responsible, to 10, which was a great deal of responsibility. And overall, 3/4 of Jews scored 6 or higher, so above the middle. And in fact, the mean for the population who responded was 6.6. Well, what's interesting here is how it varies. It's not surprising to say that these 4 questions correlate with each other. They're associated with each other. If you're in the group of people who say the climate is definitely changing, your group scored on average 7.4 for personal responsibility. Probably changing, 5.5. Probably not changing, 3.7. Definitely not changing, 0.4. So you can see that there is a range of views, and your sense of responsibility varies according to your belief in climate change. And the same is true for whether you think it's entirely, mainly human activity or natural activity. One attitude is strongly associated with the other. And again, the same is true with whether you're extremely worried, somewhat worried, not at all worried. And I think that's important because my belief is, this is not evidenced, but that if you feel a personal responsibility to reduce climate change, you're more likely to be acting, and feeling responsible is associated with these other attitudes. So I think it's very important people keep having the argument and keep discussing.
So yeah, this is digging deeper then. Who are these people, and are there key differences in age or gender or religious affiliation or other factors that lead people to have certain kinds of views?
Thank you, Rabbi Jonathan. That's exactly what I'd like to share with you now. There are very important variations. Women are slightly more likely to be concerned about the climate. Younger people also, but not quite as dramatically as you might expect. Certainly our young people are amongst our climate activists, but there's a variation amongst young people. Those 2 factors are important. Economic situation is very important. People who are struggling financially are less concerned about the climate. They have other priorities in their life, perhaps. And there's a very strong difference according to whether people have a degree or not. So people with a degree are more concerned about the climate than people without a degree. Now, all of those are important, but not nearly as important as 2 other factors. a very strong issue is political affiliation, and I can come back with more detail if you want, but very crudely, there is a right to left variation. So if you are a conservative voter, you are much less likely to have positive climate change attitudes, or perhaps to see yourself as aligned with climate activism, which perhaps isn't quite the same thing. And similarly, there's a big difference around denomination. So liberal, reform, and Masorti Jews are more climate positive, non-members somewhere in between, S&P not far away actually, and then the United Synagogue, and then actually quite substantially less conscious of the climate, either because there isn't the concern there or not the awareness there in the strictly Orthodox community. So those are the main differences. So I'm going to draw to a close now so that you have time for discussion. But essentially, I've drawn attention to this relationship between these different attitudes and how they're driving personal responsibility. There are a lot of different variation, factors driving differences in attitudes. Party affiliation and denomination are the strongest. And one thing maybe we could have a moment to talk about this, but Judaism has a funny place in all of this. You'd think that religiosity would drive greater climate awareness. And actually it operates in a strange way, because amongst liberal and reform Jews, greater religiosity leads to a stronger sense of climate consciousness. But amongst strictly Orthodox Jewish people, greater religiosity actually is associated with lower climate awareness. So it's quite complicated. But these are just some benchmark findings, a starting point, hopefully to provide evidence for the debate.
Thank you, Carli. There was one very interesting comment, several interesting comments in the chat, but also some that I had. First of all, there was a question about comparative studies. Do you know how this compares to studies in the States, in the Jewish community, or indeed in other faith communities? Are we similar to other faith communities? Are we typical of the population in general, or are we more or less sort of climate crisis conscious?
So I'm not an expert in this area, but broadly speaking, it looks as if the Jewish community in Britain is a little bit more climate positive than the general population. But I think that's largely driven by differences in our composition. A more socioeconomically advantaged population, for example. In comparison with other religious groups, the general finding is that religion doesn't drive more climate awareness. Slightly unexpectedly, there isn't a complete correlation between religiosity and climate awareness that you might expect.
I wonder then whether there's something we have to learn and we're failing here to teach in the way that we could.
I think that, I could just share with you a little bit more about the difference in the Jewish community in terms of denomination. For example, if we look at who says the climate is definitely changing, you can see there is a gradient across the community. And similarly, the second row here shows you whether people believe it's entirely or mainly caused by human activity. I think the important thing is not to see this as a way of denigrating any part of the community, but just to acknowledge that different parts of the community are in different places. For example, perhaps the climate discussions have been happening on the bima of reform, liberal, Masorti synagogues more than they have been in other shuls. I'm nervous of over explaining things because I don't have the research, but I think that the important thing is to understand where each community is and to support that community in thinking about what is relevant, how might it shift increase the conversation in its own community.
And of course that's where we're going to go very shortly, and there's some fabulous initiatives across the denominations which will be talked about shortly. Can I ask you something? Were you able to press on the question, what does, do you feel responsible? What does actually responsibility mean? It's something I'm going to ask people in the conversation to come, but were you able to take that question forward? Did you get a sense from your research as to, okay then, so what do people mean by it?
No, we didn't. Unfortunately, I'd love to do some more research about what that is, and also maybe some research about what people feel about the climate movement, because I think perhaps some parts of the Jewish community feel less affinity for it, and there's work to do there. But whether or not it means, I mean, there's so many things it could mean. Does it mean responsibility to change your own personal behavior? Does it mean to be part of a kahila, to be an activist, to press politically, or to press corporate organizations? But no, I'm afraid at this point in time, I don't have good research evidence to support your debate. I wish we did.
Well, I hope we'll be able to take that. We're going to bring you back after we've had a wider conversation, Carli, to ask what sort of comments and what perhaps future directions in research that might prompt. But thank you, and thank you to JPR for undertaking this research, which is going to guide us now in our work ahead as EcoSynagogue and in all the different sectors of the Jewish community.
That's great to hear, Rabbi Jonathan.
Thank you, and we're bringing you back shortly. I want to welcome, we've got quite a panel, a very rich and skilled panel of people who are deeply involved, many of them for many years in this area. So I want to welcome Naomi Verber and Rafi Addlestone, Andrea Pass, Ian Lancaster, Rabbi Tanya Sakhnovich, Laura Hendy, and Andrew Lee from the Board of Deputies, our partner in this. If you'd join me, and we're going to, Carli, if you could kindly unscreen share. Sorry. And we're just for a little bit. And we're going to be talking together. And what I'm hoping to do is manage this as a conversation. So there's so much more that everybody has to say, and we're looking forward to a future event in which different organizations can present their plans and their strategies and their hopes much more fully in 2 or 3 months' time. So this is kind of a taster and a provoker. And I'm going to introduce people on the panel, each in turn, and not necessarily ask everybody exactly the same questions. So, Laura, first of all, you are formerly a chief executive at Our Carbon, and now you're sustainability officer at World Jewish Relief, which is about to have a superb kind of mission statement on its work on climate and resilience. First of all, can I just ask you? Clearly, World Jewish Relief thinks this issue is really important, or it wouldn't have appointed a full-time person like yourself. Why is it so important in the charitable sector?
Hi, thank you. Very good question. I think for us, we see climate change as something that we have a Jewish and a humanitarian imperative to be doing everything that we can on. It's unavoidable now that climate change is one of the most important factors impacting the world's most vulnerable people, and we can no longer afford, as World Jewish Relief or as any international humanitarian charity, to simply support people with poverty reduction or responding to disasters like floods and droughts without recognizing that all of this is getting a lot worse, and we need to understand how the climate is changing and help people prepare for that. So yeah, I think the field that we work in has changed, and we have to change with it.
And that's going to impact on, I guess, it's going to be integrated into all the work and all the giving that you do. Thank you. Going to come back to you shortly. Andrea Pass, you're really project manager. In effect, I want to say on behalf of all the rabbis, you're effectively CEO of EcoSynagogue, and we're very, very grateful. We're very, very grateful to you. That question about what responsibility means, what it ought to mean, can I ask you, how, as EcoSynagogue, you're directing it to sort of enable us to take responsibility? What are the key features of its work in your eyes? Andrea, if you're muted still. There we are.
Yeah, sorry. I was telling everybody else to make sure they were unmuted. I forgot. Thank you. So the EcoSynagogue project is very special And the reason it's special is because it's taken responsibility for moving the whole community forward in terms of sustainability and improving our worship spaces and their ability to reduce their carbon, and giving them measurable and tangible ways in order for them to do so. That responsibility, it works in two ways, really. Internally, we have 5 amazing rabbis, and those rabbis take forward the project into their own communities and encourage the responsibility to be spread there. And externally, collectively, we then present a collective Jewish response to the outside world. I think that's the responsibility we have, is to push that forward, and also to be an umbrella for everything that's going on within the Jewish community, to allow other people's voices to be heard, so we can work collectively and much stronger. I think Rabbi Tanya has got something that she'd like
and
to...
I'm going to pick up in a moment, just with a prior warning to you, Andrew, from the Board of Deputies, that question of collectively and the whole community. But Rabbi Tanya.
Just very briefly, I wanted to summarize it by saying, good evening, everyone, by saying EcoSynagogue, I think, is like eco-hub of the Jewish community in our country. It's like a collective eco-conscience of the Jewish community in the United Kingdom.
And that's what Rabbi David spoke about as the collective conscience of the Jewish community. Collective, the Board of Deputies, your operations director, recently appointed Andrew Lee for the Board of Deputies. You've backed, partnered and nurtured EcoSynagogue from the start. Can I ask you why that's so important to the Board of Deputies, and also how you want to use your cross-communal kind of record and authority to advance the sense of the importance of this issue?
Thank you. Yes, the Board of Deputies, as you quite rightly say, has nurtured right from the start EcoSynagogue. The Board of Deputies is the democratically elected, democratically accountable, I suppose, to the community. It's the voice and projects to the government and to other areas within the wider society. And it's now taken on board the importance of not only just in relation to focusing on synagogues, but also itself. So the HOs, the leadership of the democratic leadership of the Board of Deputies, has chosen to adapt the EcoSynagogue audit for organisations, and the Board of Deputies will be probably the first organisation to undertake that audit. Leadership is by example. Where we tread, others hopefully will then follow.
That's brilliant. I guess environment, like charity, starts at home, and we all need to take that really seriously. The support of the Board of Deputies has been really core to the development of EcoSynagogue, so I just want to express a thank you. And I'm going to come to you, to Naomi Verba, with a big background in management consultancy. You're head of environmental policy at the United Synagogue. And I'm aware, I think lots of us are aware, through the Jewish Chronicle, through the Chief Rabbi Ephraim Mervis's piece in it, of the very, very important, significant project that's been launched, and at which you're at the helm. So that sense, what should personal responsibility or communal responsibility mean to a synagogue and to its members in your eyes? You're going to have chance later down the line for a fuller presentation, but just the headlines.
Sure, thank you for inviting me. We're delighted to be partaking this evening as the United Synagogue. So what does communal responsibility mean and individual responsibility mean from United Synagogue perspective? Well, a lot. From a communal perspective, the work that was done by the Institute of Jewish Policy Research really honed into us how important it was to respond in terms of the United Synagogue community to the environmental crisis. Their research showed that within the United Synagogue members, there was over 60% were concerned or very concerned about the environmental crisis, and more than 7 out of 10 wanted to take action on it. So that gave us a mandate, if you like, to say this is important, and we know our members find this very important. So communally, we have the size and the scale and the resources to do a lot across a large number of organizations. So the approach we've taken has very much been based on the EcoSynagogue foundational work you did with the audit, you kind of showed us how to approach all parts of communal life, how you use your building, what you eat, what you talk about, how you educate, etc. And we built 7 projects around that for our first year. So that's the sort of communal element of it. And Deloitte is being rolled out across all our communities. We're sort of tackling each project together in a stage plan over a year. So there's very much a sense of, we're starting this together, we're going to progress together through it, we're going to feedback together through it, and we want to work throughout with EcoSynagogue to roll out these projects. And then from an individual perspective, this is not just about sort of, head office making policy that shuls or employees need to follow. We want to partner with our communities, our rabbis, our rebbetzins, our employees throughout, to understand, okay, how does this really relate to you? What do you want to do more of? What are the difficult things? Where are the challenges going to be? And we've spent probably the major part of the last 3 months has not been coming up with the projects or the practicalities, but consulting with people and understanding, how is this going to work realistically? And how can we make sure that we're partnering the whole way through? This is not enforced, but something you actually want to do and can sustain.
Thank you. And we're hoping there'll be a chance to come back to everybody with one more question while we still have time. But Rafi, that question, how is this going to work realistically? You're in the corporate sector, you've worked for 10 years in Deloitte as a sustainability lead. And I've appreciated the fact that you've been quite challenging on this issue. Greta Thunberg said of COP26, all talk, no action. Do you think we need real specific targets? Do you think we need to be much more focused? This is where we've got to get to, and we've got to say that as a community sort of a bit more loudly. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely.
We've lost you for a second, Rafi. Or maybe it's me.
Unlike other topics, other sort of scares me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can now. Yeah.
Unlike other social, Unlike other social justice topic, climate change is quite easy to measure your success, right? Being able to count the amount of emissions that you're able to reduce is a tangible impact that you can make, and being able to do that is within our gift as a society and as a community, and challenging ourselves to be true lights into the nations, to be architect leaders in this agenda takes courage and requires us to think big about what our impact can be. And of course, starting with our own backyard and how we operate our own organizations and institutions is a starting point. But what more can we do to engage our Jewish community, people in our community who have great power as individuals and as a community? How can we really take a shining light and become pioneers in this domain? I think we have that opportunity.
I really appreciate that. And one of the things I'm looking at in my own community is how can we turn the work we've done on the audit into a strategy and say, this is where we need to be in 1 year, in 3 years, in 5 years. I think that is really, really important. I'm turning to you last here right now, but absolutely not least, Ian Lancaster. You have the environment portfolio for Reform Judaism, and I just want to recognize that we owe to you, I think one of the real pioneers at the Board of Deputies was Aubrey Rose, and the pioneering rabbi above all is Rabbi Jeffrey Newman. So we've a lot to be thankful for to Reform Judaism. Can I ask you, you've wanted as an organization to affiliate with EcoSynagogue. Why is that so important to you?
We take the view that there are 3 components to what we as a movement, we as a representative organization need to be doing. And one of the things we need to be doing is setting a lead. We need to set an example for our members. So we're trying to be, as an organization, as green as we can be, slow but steady. We wish to be a part of EcoSynagogue because we want to show our members that they should also be part of EcoSynagogue. We want to encourage our members to recognize the issue and to act on the issue. But also, I think it's important that as a synagogal representative organization, we give them the religious underlying rationale for why this is important. I mean, we all know we all know, JPR has just shown us that a significant percentage of Jews in this country know that climate change is a significant factor. But it's worth us setting out the progressive Judaic rationale for why we need to be taking steps, starting, of course, with the extremely well-known phrase tikkun olam.
Thank you. And actually, that one of the questions which I think, Carli, maybe you'll comment back on this at the end, or just in about 5 minutes or so, is where's the Jewish in this? If that's not as big a motivator as how people vote in general elections. Something hurts me as a rabbi to hear that, but clearly we have to recognize its importance and perhaps be doing something about it. Setting a lead has come up in what several people have said. So I want to come back to, maybe, I don't know whether it's you, Andrea, or Rabbi Tanya here, to say, setting a lead in EcoSynagogue. How can this overarching organization help us set a lead?
Well, EcoSynagogue has a really unique place within the Jewish community, exactly because of this united voice. And at the moment, we have 5 rabbis representing 5 movements. And that idea of unity, on the one hand, as the united Jewish voice, gives us strength. But at the same time, each of the rabbis, supported by their movements, try to encourage communities within each of the movements and provide tools for the movement, for the communities to get engaged with eco questions. We are raising awareness within 5 different movements, and I think that gives us power within each denomination of our Jewish community, and that's where our power lies, by encouraging our colleagues, by doing work together, not only as a united Jewish voice, but separately in each movement as well. So it's a grassroots work, but also is a work as a Jewish community together.
Thank you. And Rabbi Jeffrey Berger, who we had a conversation on Friday, just before Shabbat, and you've just joined the EcoSynagogue rabbinic team, and you reminded the phrase kinat sofrim, which is kind of, let me put it gently, being inspired by the good work that each other does to try and do the same ourselves. And we can see that in the different steps different movements take, and I'm hoping that this will be a process of collaborative learning and sharing of ideas, good practice and good suggestions. But this is synagogue's bit, and I'm just gonna ask 2 more people questions. I'm not going to get back to everybody, because I think as the different sort of rabbis and movements, we're looking at an event maybe 2 to 3 months down the line where we can present our programs in much more depth, Dorot and what the other movements are doing. So I'm just going to come back to Laura and Rafi, who are representing the charitable and the corporate sector. Can I ask you, Laura, the work of World Jewish Relief, is that a kind of trend-setting work in the charitable sector? Because you didn't necessarily, one might have said a charity appointing a sustainability officer. Is that trend-setting in the world of charities? Is that what Tear Fund and CAFOD and others are doing as well?
Yeah, thank you for your question. I think it's definitely where all of the charitable sectors are going, and I don't think we are necessarily setting the trend. I think some of the larger international charities are ahead of us in terms of having a much bigger focus on the environment. I think also the sort of charity sector, when you work abroad, is divided slightly into the longer term development charities that work on reducing poverty and strengthening people's livelihoods. And then the charities that maybe come in and respond when there's been a disaster, so the humanitarian sector. But now that we have an issue like climate change, which is affecting long-term societal development, as well as causing a lot more disasters, those 2 sort of groups are coming together, and climate and the environment are right at the forefront of both, and they're bringing them together. So it's very much a trend, very much where all of the charities are focusing on.
And it's good that the Jewish community then is part of it, and we appreciate World Jewish Relief's work. Thank you. Rafi, I want to come back to you, hoping you can hear this, but you're from the corporate sector, and one of the parts of the vision is that all parts of the Jewish community have an agenda and a strategy and goals in this area. The synagogal community, the religious community, the charitable community, the corporate community. And one of the big issues here is investment. A very key moment at COP when there was a plea from a Christian minister in the South Pacific be my brother, help me. And I asked what that means, and he said, it's where you invest or don't invest. How do you see the corporate sector, and in a way where what Jews invest in, and business world coming along on this agenda? Where your audio is sort of flickering a little bit, Rafi.
There's a spectrum of different options as to how you can think about the role of investment when it comes to driving change in a space. Do you want to just cut off your investment to oil and gas majors? Do you want to, at the end of the extreme, invest in disruptive startups and climate tech? And there isn't no one right answer. The important thing is to think carefully about how you think your power can be deployed. Some people argue the best thing to do is to engage with the biggest emitters, and to engage them by being shareholders in those companies. You're then able to be activists to try and make them change faster. So there's no one route, there's no one hard and fast rule for how to deploy the power of capital for climate change. The important thing is that this is, as per the research that we've started this conversation about, this is about raising awareness, raising the heat of the issue amongst your network, and finance is a part of that.
Thank you. And one of the things, a number of us, Rabbi Mason, a number of us are friendly with Andy Atkins, who's one of the leaders in the Christian world here, and he said the task of religion is to hold the feet to the fire, to keep the pressure up. Particularly, was thinking of our lobbying capacity as faiths. So, Carli, I just want to come back to you and ask you, for a minute or two, do you want to just comment on what you've heard? Will that help with future research? Is there something you want to tell us all that we have not taken note of in what you've said, for example?
Well, it's all super interesting, and I'm looking forward to listening back and processing, because ultimately, when you asked earlier, we were talking just briefly about whether or not more research is needed and what we could do and so on. Ultimately, what we need to do is understand what is going to be useful to the community, what needs to be known, what more do we need to understand, and we need to respond to comments of these kinds and to think harder about how we can feed in as your work progresses. I mentioned earlier that these are just 4 questions that we've asked, and hopefully they'll be useful, but they're just benchmarks, and we should follow in time and ask again and see if things have changed. But we only asked about attitudes, and we didn't ask anything about behaviors, for example. And maybe it's useful to understand, we haven't asked about behaviors in reference to this kind of thing since the mid-1990s. Apparently we did do some work then about behaviors. Perhaps it will be useful for us to find out whether or not people are aware of these initiatives that the communities are developing. So in time, the work in Deloitte and the work of all the different communities, perhaps in time we'll be able to find out whether the Jewish community is responding. Or more fundamentally, you were expressing some dismay that Judaism maybe is not driving change, or not driving people's attitude. Maybe what we need to think about is, what are the most meaningful messages to the community? What is it about climate change that is meaningful to people from across the different religious denominations? Is it, for example, the security risk to Israel if climate change continues, or the innovation in, what is it? So I haven't fully processed all the interesting things that have been said, and how we can help more, but ultimately we're in responsive mode. We will listen to what you are, you as the community leaders and change makers, what is useful to you, and then we will try and respond to that in time.
Thank you. And you can also hold us to the mark by saying you've done research in 2 years' time and we've failed to make a difference, God forbid. So I think we need you. We need to be guided by the questions that you ask and by the responses that you receive. I've got a couple of minutes to sort of comment on this panel conversation before we move on, because it is Tu B'Shvat, to something about J-tree and tree planting, which I know is part of, first of all, it's a lovely thing to do, but it's part of, I think, every synagogue and every denomination and every gardener's dream. First of all, I want to apologize. I found it hard to sort of read the chat and follow the conversations and guide them. So there's a lot in the chat that we'll try and respond to in future. I also want to say that there's a sector we don't have here, which is very important, which is schools. Jewish schools and other schools which pupils attend and are part of, and many young Jewish school students are leaders in persuading their schools to have a very engaged environment policy. So that's another part of what we want to look at. I also want to say that we'll look at a future event, like I said, 2 or 3 months down the line, with a much fuller presentation of programs that synagogues and denominations are undertaking. But one of the things I want to highlight here is the bringing together of different sectors of the community and their different disciplines: the charitable, the corporate, the synagogal, the school, the educative, and how we can learn from each other, inspire each other, and move forward together, because this issue is urgent, and for many of us it's become one of the driving passions of our lives. For me, that when you say V'shinantam levanecha in the Shema every day, you shall teach them to your children. If I don't leave my children, if I don't meet my utmost to leave the children a livable, sustainable, bio-rich, beautiful world, what Torah am I teaching my children? So it's an absolute driver here. The last dimension I want to add is the international one. EcoSynagogue has been approached by communities as far away as Australia, also Israel, also contacts with America, with Chazon, the excellent environmental movement there. Just in the last few days, Green Shabbat in Germany. So the more we can learn from each other and take things forward and be embracing in our approach, in my view, the better. There are many questions out there. I won't say we'll leave it there. We'll look at them, be provoked by them, and take as much as we can forward. There's going to be now, because it is Tu B'Shvat, the birthday of the trees. I am a tree-hugging person. There's going to be a presentation from jtree.global, and then some words of conclusion by Rabbi Jeffrey Berger. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. JTree is a project of EcoSynagogue, and we recommend that anybody who wishes to plant trees for their community, for whatever reason, does so through JTree, because it's the communal response, the Jewish communal response, and it plants in areas of where they've been researched. I don't generally work on JTree, but Angelina does. But Angelina's got terrible sore throat, so I'm going to read out what she has asked me to say. So JTree Global was conceived following a report by Professor Growler, endorsed by the United Nations in the summer of 2019, on how many trillion trees were needed. I'll say that again, trillion trees were needed worldwide, and critically, where they were needed. It was launched at Tu B'Shvat 2020, just before lockdown, in the UK and in the United Synagogue. And it is led here by Jonathan Drury, author of Around the World in 80 Trees, Rabbi Wittenberg and others, and in the US by Chazon and Dr. Ace Levine. So JTree is a collective Jewish response to the climate emergency to plant trees and protect forests. Trees sustain all life and store carbon. Scientists believe that planting trees is the most effective way to limit climate change. And the UK alone needs 50 million more trees. Our partners. So our planting projects must be ecologically and ethically sound and must be for the benefit of the community. And they're researched really very carefully. JTree's partners are balanced between the UK and abroad, and they've been chosen for their integrity and effectiveness in sustainable tree planting, working with people such as the Woodland Trust, Seed Madagascar, International Tree Foundation, who works with communities in Africa and the UK to carry out sustainable community forestry projects. So JTree is a separate but partnership project to EcoSynagogue. and it enables those communities taking the environmental audit to improve their environmental credentials through conservation, planting, and community engagement. JTRE enables the Jewish community to collectively add to the total trees planted, either through individual or community donations for simchas and other special events. So one I know of recently, there was a bar mitzvah, and the bar mitzvah family planted a tree for every one of the friends of the bar mitzvah that was there. So trees sustain all life. They absorb carbon dioxide and they give out oxygen, as I'm sure everybody here knows better than me. Scientists believe that planting trees is the most effective way to limit climate change. And the UK alone needs, as I said before, 50 million more trees. So we can do so by donating, by gifting trees on special occasions, by compensating for unavoidable travel or carbon emissions from our home, car or workplace, and by planting trees with our own hands. So the whole tree planting through JTRE, if you donate through JTRE, you can be assured that each tree planted is in exactly the right place for the right purpose and is the right tree. And that's why we would commend to everybody looking to do some tree planting to do it through JTRE.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that presentation. And if you go to the site, there are a wonderful range of pictures of what people are doing and have done. We're going to conclude with words from the newest rabbi to join the EcoSynagogue rabbinic team, Rabbi Jeffrey Berger, and I just really appreciate your participation in our work, in which you've been involved in different ways for a long time. Rabbi Berger.
Thank you, Rabbi Wittenberg, and thank you to the entire EcoSynagogue team for the opportunity both to give the summary and the vote of thanks, and also for welcoming me so warmly onto the board. In offering a summary of tonight's vote of thanks, I would highlight the following recurring key points. It is wonderful that through EcoSynagogue and our partnership with the Board of Deputies, we have one focus across Anglo Jewry. We are delighted by the early spade work which has been carried out by the various communities represented here this evening, as well as the announcement this week of the new Dorot program. By sharing our ideas about best practice, we make it possible for communities both large and small, affiliated or unaffiliated, as well as for each of us as individuals to significantly mark where we are in this process and what lies ahead. It pleases me to think of the application of the verse from Psalms chapter 133, Shir Hama'alot le David, Hine ma tov u'ma shevet achim gam yachad. A song of ascents of David. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for us to dwell together in unity. That's my first observation. The second observation is that with the Institute of Jewish Policy Research survey, we have benchmarked where we are as a Jewish community in this significantly challenging period of human history. And therefore, we can begin to build a calendar of events and milestones for the kinds of projects to be implemented in the coming months. My third observation, which echoes as though, it echoes the thought, of the late Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks to me, is that tonight's program in the EcoSynagogue project creates a Judaism for each of us that is relevant and engaged, deeply engaged with the world. We may have a long road ahead of us, but this evening, and forgive the pun, we have firmly planted our flag and raised the issue of climate change to the top of our communal agenda. So please stay tuned, as Rabbi Wittenberg said, for more events and updates to follow from EcoSynagogue. Like a long distance marathon, I believe we need to cooperate across denominations, because just as the pandemic did not discriminate by differentiating between Jews of one flavor or another, or for that matter, between Jews and people of the world, neither will climate change. And so we are keenly aware of our interdependence in issues impacting all of humanity. Let me close by sincerely thanking all of our speakers. I won't do that by name, but you had the opportunity to hear all of them. To thank the representative from the Board of Deputies and from World Jewish Relief and from Deloitte this is one of the reasons why I shouldn't name everyone by name. And of course, from the movement of Reform Judaism, everyone who participated in the panel discussion that was so aptly and dynamically led by Rabbi Wittenberg. Let me also especially thank Andrea and Angelina on the EcoSynagogue team who organized tonight's program. And most of all, I want to thank you, the esteemed audience of nearly 100 people who joined us this evening. I want to wish you all a very joyous Tu B'Shvat. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Berger. Thank you, and wishing everybody a good Tu B'Shvat, a joyous Tu B'Shvat. And if you get your chance to get your hands in the soil, there are lots of local planting schemes around. That would be wonderful. Erev Tov to everybody. We're going to analyze the chat. We're going to take out the questions. We're going to do our best to take them really seriously. And we hope this evening has been an impetus to everybody to increase our activism and climate consciousness. Laila Tov.
And Toda Rabba.